Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Carol Fetterman, and I work with David Morgan with American Financial Education Alliance, AFEA. We're happy that you're here this evening to be a part of our Social Security Benefit Options webinar. I just want to be able to say that David is very resourceful. I've been working with him for several years now, and he knows a lot about what you're about to hear this evening. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce David Morgan. Hi, David.
Hi, folks. Hope everybody can hear me okay. Carol, everybody hear me okay as far as you know?
I believe so. Everybody at the top of your screen, you'll be able to see a chat and a Q&A. And if you click on the chat, that's where you'll be able to type any messages. Hopefully you'll be able to respond, let us know that you can hear okay.
Okay.
And you can click on Q&A and we can collect any questions that may come along during the webinar. And we'll be happy to answer those questions if time allows at the end.
Good. You kind of be our hostess then, right?
Yeah, it looks like Jacqueline, she can hear okay. Audio's
Yeah,
working.
How many do we have? Approximately 8 or 10?
Yes, it looks like about 8.
Oh, good. Well, folks, thanks everybody for attending. I confess to you, this may be one of those topics might be a little harder than average to get engaged with. It's a lot of numbers and statistics. So the goal of this session, frankly, is to hopefully trigger something in your personal circumstance or world that you think you'd like to study a little bit more about and get some more information about. So as I said at the outset, and Carol introduced me, I have got several designations. The pertinent one for this webinar is a certified financial fiduciary. It's actually a designation that candidly, the exam was a lot harder than I thought. I'm one of those rare ducks who went to law school but didn't practice. And I won't say it was like a law exam, but it was close. So I have 3 other ones that are pretty important also. Masters of Science in Financial Services, which is similar to a CFA or CFP, but it's more estate planning and a little more of a legal bent. Also Certified Estate Advisor. And then most recently, RMA, Retirement Management Advisor. If appropriate, we'll touch on how those are pertinent to tonight's evening session. So again, welcome everybody. The best thing to do, if you have questions, you can either hold on to them or shoot a message to Carol and she can interject it, of course, at any time. If you have specific questions, it's tough in an audience like this. Nobody can really interact easily with anybody else. But at the tail end of this, we're hopefully going to trigger something in your heart or head that says you'd like to learn something more about this. So at the end of it, we can set up a time for a brief phone conversation. Yeah, you can either do it on my Calendly link and or shoot an email to Carol. She'll send that to forward it to me, or you can send it to myself too, for that matter. So again, the goal is to hopefully give some information that makes this topic pertinent for you. So who's AFEA? A lot of folks have asked me that over the years. We are a nonprofit. Our mission basically is to inform and empower Americans to take control of their finances by providing comprehensive financial education in communities nationwide. Typically, I do these pre-COVID, at least, more on campuses and small colleges. With COVID, of course, we're doing a lot more computer work. I'm getting dangerously proficient at the computer, which is kind of interesting. But and also for some interesting reason, I have a number of churches, again, pre-COVID mainly, where we would do educational or financial seminars for those kind of congregations. Why is that important? Because as a nonprofit, our funding is effectively from the members and the teachers. So we take, first off, personal donations. Secondly, we do offer tuition from advanced courses. We have chapter sponsorships. And I, as one of the members, pay dues to keep everything afloat. So If you'd like some more information, you can go to the website, myafia.org. And also, we even have a workbook, which I frankly usually remiss to show either now or immediately, right? Because it's literally overwhelming. There's so many options. So, maybe just jot down some important notes for your situation, and we can kind of address them one-on-one as we go through. If you want to become a member, you can do so at the website and /register. My chapter ID is North Central Florida, 4547, but North Central Florida. I cover effectively kind of between Orlando, Jacksonville, and as far west as, sometimes even Tallahassee. I actually go to Texas sometimes, but basically North Central Florida is kind of the where I do most of my events. Disclosure here basically says we're not giving any personal, legal, financial, or tax advice. This is information that's generic in nature. The neat thing about my firm is we do have a team of attorneys, accountants, CPAs for those one-on-one specific licensing type questions. So the goal of this session really is to give you more of an overview, and again, hopefully instill some ideas that warrant you saying, I'd like to learn more and do something about that. So this is our little Owlie. Basically, he's going to help us assist us in the learning experience. He'll let us appear time to time to notify of any tips and suggestions to help you answer questions and follow along. Many of the slides in this class are also coincide with the workbook. Some folks have workbooks, some don't. But effectively, the main thing is to take a lot of notes, hopefully get some information that you can find pertinent for your situation.
We want to start with our first poll, right, David, just to give it a test? Yeah.
Carol, so we'll go ahead and ask the question.
Sure. The question is, what percentage of people take their Social Security before their full retirement age, or their FRA? So that poll is open. Feel free to interact and engage. We have some answers coming in. All kinds of answers here. Okay.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's kind of a little bit of a tricky one.
It looks like our most popular answer is 60%, letter C.
Oh, good. So we'll check that and see what the our owl fella says. It is 60. And that's basically Social Security to the average earner. 60% comes from income from other sources. 40% is actually Social Security benefits. I will tell you that's an interesting question because it varies by state and county. I've actually heard in Florida, Social Security benefits are closer to about half. Candidly, the younger generation, myself included, I guess I'm in my mid-60s, aren't often as prudent as our parents or the great generation, as we called it. So, but it's a sobering number to know that effectively Social Security was initially designed when it was passed way back in the 30s to be a supplement to your savings. And what's happening more and more is the trend. The trend is to make it becoming more the primary source of wage earnings. So with that being said, this is an interesting question. The question was once asked, 567, what does that mean? That's literally the number of multiple claiming strategies based upon ages 59 and a half to 70 and the different combinations and matrices. It's literally overwhelming. I attended a class way back in 2015. It was called 567. We couldn't figure out if it was a special code, whatever. And the rationale and reasoning for that number was that's literally how many different calculations are to consider Social Security options. So the important takeaway here is not the 567, but the importance of calculating what a mistake can mean. And a mistake effectively could cost you $100,000 or more during your lifetime. So I've heard over the question many times over the years, will Social Security benefits be there for us? Well, in 1999, there was a congressional study that came out and they said, watch out, this trust fund is going to be bankrupt by 2020. Well, they modified that in 2009 and said in 2017, we're going to be dipping into the trust fund, and by 2041, the trust fund will be exhausted because effectively there's not enough money to pay effectively if 76 cents of the dollars only of the full dollar. In other words, we're having about a 25% erosion. So very simply, it's a function of there's more and more recipients and fewer contributing workers. When Social Security was started back in the 30s, there was actually 11 workers for every one recipient, and the average expected payout was about 3.5, 4 years. Now that number is about one recipient for every two workers, and depending on the state and county, the average life expectancy is anywhere from 78 to 82 years old. So instead of being a short-term 2 or 3 year payout, it's effectively becoming a 20 or 30-year payout. So, too few workers and too many recipients in a nutshell. So how do we solve this? Well, again, it depends on the congressional study, but effectively in 2010, they said we're going to have to do something. Again, either raise the retirement age or take in more income. And how do we do that? Well, the most recent statement, 2014, said, again, a 77 cents. So if you look at all the numbers here, it's a little bit daunting. You can see the trend. 2009, 2010, 2014. So what are we going to do? It's kind of simple math. We have to either increase the income or the source of incomes for paying Social Security, delay retirement age as long as possible, and or ideally find other sources of income. And so we want to look at some options on that last question is what other sources of income could there be for you over and above Social Security? Now, probably the two most important questions I've had over the years of practice, 27 years now. Number one is, am I going to run out of money? And the second one is poor or failing health. We won't address the second one tonight, but let's talk about that first one. Could I possibly run out of money? About 54% or about half of the United States is concerned about that. So one thing to think about for those listening, if you have not taken Social Security, an important consideration is when should I take it? As you know, you're eligible between ages 62 and as late as age 70. Somebody wants to try to call in already. I can't believe it. They're not supposed to do that. Well, let's look at kind of a fun cartoon. What's the matter, Earl? You look a little down. Well, according to statistics, I have a better than 50% chance of living to the age of 87. The other fellow says, well, what's wrong with that? He says, well, real simply, I can't afford to live that long. So that's a real simply question is we don't know when our good time comes to leave this good earth. So here's the question. There are three pieces of the Social Security benefits options puzzle. Let's first off look at what are the benefits available to you. Number two, understand what your various options are. And then number three, most importantly, look at how do you maximize those lifetime benefits. You folks probably all receive now, I get mine electronically. Some people still get it in the mail. I think it depends on the county. But you have a Social Security statement. It summarizes your earnings that were subject to payroll taxes. It shows how much you and your employers paid into the Social Security and Medicare taxes. And it estimates your retirement benefits based on retiring at different ages. For most people, there's an FRA called full retirement age. For those born in 55 or 56, my category, it's about 66 and a half years old. Early retirement effectively is between 62 and 66. And then later retirement typically is 66 and a half to age 70. That's kind of the basic windows of time. So it's called a PIA. Primary insurance amount is the amount upon which your benefits are based. It's determined by the average of the highest 35 years of indexed earnings in which you paid payroll taxes. If you were employed less than 35 years, you worked part-time or had long periods of unemployment, the years in which you had low or zero earnings will be averaged into your calculations and could lower the benefit. So very simply, the primary insurance amount, the government does give you the benefit of your highest earning quarters over a 35-year period of time. So if you want to set up a Social Security account online, you can. You can actually go to ssa.gov/myaccount. You create your own personal Social Security account. It allows you to review your Social Security, review your Medicare benefits, update your address, and of course, change your direct deposit data. So, what are your options? Well, let's look at some word choices here, because I will share you. When you call Social Security, a little footnote, legally, they are not allowed to give you any advice on Social Security. They can only give information. Sounds like a tricky question, but a lot of folks call Social Security asking, what should I do? Where would I go? And they typically should not really give you advice because they're there for information, i.e., that's the goal of an advisor. What an advisor can do is answer these questions. What's the difference between eligible versus entitled? What's a WEP versus a GPO? Cost of living or COLA? What are the claiming ages? What is working after making your claim look like? What about taxation? How are my benefits taxed? What about my spousal benefits? And what are some common claiming strategies? So let's talk about the first definition. Eligible worker basically is anybody that's accumulated the amount of hours credits for claiming Social Security as at least 62 years old. Entitled is somebody who's applied for benefits, whether or not they received them or had them suspended. So it's a little bit of a tricky question, but effectively, eligible simply means you're in that window of time of 62 years or older, and you've got enough of those credits we talked about a minute ago. Entitled just means you've applied for benefits, and hopefully you're going to get a yes or no. There's what they call windfall elimination provision, or WEP. Effectively, what that means is it reduces your benefit if you receive a pension from a federal, state, or government based on work where Social Security taxes were not taken out of your pay. As an example, if you work for the federal government, you have a TSP, Thrift Savings Plan. And the windfall elimination provision simply says you can't double dip to the maximum. And so that falls into the second definition, GPO, Government Pension Offset, or GPO. GPO means it reduces your spouse's or widower's benefits if you receive a pension from a federal, state, or local government based on work where you did not receive or did not pay Social Securities. So it's real complicated. There's all sorts of formulas and computers on this. But what the government is saying from a social policy perspective is, if you didn't pay it into the system for that full 40 quarters, you paid maybe 10 or 20 years, and or you had a nice benefit from your state or local government work, you can't get the maximum from both. So it's simply an offset provision. And it gets real complicated. There's lots of machinations to it. But just make a note, the takeaway here is if you worked for the government at a state, local, or federal level, you may not get the full Social Security payout you're entitled to because you're receiving these other benefits. So let's talk about the cost of living, or COLA. Basically, COLA provides a cost of living adjustment of inflation by helping maintain the purchasing power of your Social Security income. Since 75, it's been based on the Consumer Price Index for urban workers and clerical workers. The good, the bad, the ugly. Over a 5-year period, averages about 1.6% up per year. Over 10 years, about 1.65. Over 20 years, 2.04. And 30 years, 2.26. Since it began, the COLA started in 1975, it's averaged about 3.6. And I believe for this current year, I'm not taking Social Security yet, I'm waiting, but I've been told it's about 5%. Because I think it's been pretty low the last few years. So let's talk about the window of time. When should I claim? Again, I said at the outset, think of a spectrum. The earliest age is age 62. If you're born from 1943 to 1959, your FRA, your full retirement age, is 66. If you're born 1960 or later, it's 67. And the latest age is actually 70. So, Carol, I guess we can ask a poll question here. This is a fun one because a lot of people simply don't know. But anybody have a guess as to how many different strategies there are for claiming Social Security options? I think we touched on this earlier, Carol, but do you have any takers on that question?
Yeah, the answers are coming in,
Good.
and we're at 80% of people have answered letter D, 567.
Good. We got a good audience. And that is correct. So the question becomes, when should I take it? What is the difference between taking it at 66 versus 70 or earlier? Well, make it real simple. Let's look at a grid. You take it earlier, typically you're going to get the smallest amount because they got to pay you for a longer period. And if you get employed later, it could be a possible penalty. That's not a big issue. But full retirement age basically means a higher monthly check and no penalty if you are employed. And you get the benefits starting at age 6 from 66 on. The advantage of waiting to age 70 is it's the highest monthly check and no penalty if you do become employed. But the downside is you gotta wait basically 8 years. So here's a fun question to think about. Between age 62 and age 70, the total percentage in your favor by waiting those 8 years is 57%. Literally, it's about 8.1% per year tax-free of increase. So people say, what's the big difference? A lot of this is based on life expectancy too, candidly. If you live to be in your mid-80s, the difference between taking it at 62 versus age 70 can only be six figures, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000. So I do have some clients who have poor, failing health and say, man, I better start taking it as soon as I can. I may not be on this earth real long, and I understand that. But the takeaway on this slide is the primary difference between those three major categories, total from age 62 to 70 is 57%, or averages 8% per year in your favor by waiting. So I ask a real simple question. Where else can you go and get an 8% rate of return tax-free? There is nowhere. So if you can possibly wait, there's a huge, huge advantage to waiting as late as possible. So that's kind of what those questions talk about. So let's talk about some important definitions. Deemed filing means it requires that a claimant filing for any benefit before their FRA must file for all benefits available to that at any time. A restricted application is available to workers who have reached full retirement age and allows them to restrict their application to only the spouse, only for a spousal benefit. Then you have what they call a voluntary suspension. Voluntary suspension is available to workers who have reached full retirement age. Once suspended the benefit, they can earn delayed retirement credits. Important to note, spouses cannot collect against the suspended benefit. So there's a lot of convolutions here. The main takeaway simply is when you file something, you do have some options to effectively make it revocable or change it for a later time. So let's talk about some more information. When should you start taking it? Again, we talked about that a minute ago. And it depends, what are your other assets? Effectively, Social Security is this black horse over here. And of course, the other assets is the white horse. So how will Social Security impact your benefits? The earned income limits for an age in the year 2021 this year is $18,960. So anything over that, for every $2 over that limit, $1 will be withheld from your benefits. Once you hit full retirement age, 66, for most people, your earned income limit goes to $50,520. So for every $3 over that amount, $1 is withheld from your benefits. And then another benefit again of waiting to full retirement age, after your full retirement age, meaning 67 to 70, there's no limit on earnings and there is no reduction dollar for dollar. There's a little footnote there at the bottom says during the year in which you reach your full retirement age, you can actually earn up to $48,600 a year before the month you reach FRA without any withholding. If you make more than $48,600 before the month, for every $3 of withholding takes effect for income earned prior to reaching FRA. That's a lot to take in. The operative number is, for most people, think of this number right here, 50,520 at age 66. Anything over that dollar amount, $1 will be withheld for every $3 over that. If you're 62 to 65, it's $2 over 18,960. A lot of information to take in. So again, try to remember the number that applies to your situation and make a note if you'd like. We can talk about that one-on-one. So let's talk about another definition. That's provisional income. Provisional income is the sum of all your income, including tax-free municipal bond interest, plus half of your Social Security income. So sources of income calculated in provisional income are, number one, have your Social Security income, your wages, any distributions from qualified plans like 401ks and IRAs, interest and dividend income, including interest on tax-free munis, capital gains, pension payments, or the taxable portion of your inheritance. So provisional income, again, is the sum of all your income plus half of your Social Security income. So how are they taxed? That gets a little tricky. I'm going to try and keep it simple for you. For single, widowed, or divorced people on the left over here, the first $25,000 is not taxable. From $25,000 to $34,000, up to half of it's taxable. Now that's make clear, that's not the tax bracket. That just means half of that dollar amount over here is subject to tax. But the operative number is right here. Anything over $34,000 of Social Security benefits, up to 85% of that is tax. That's not the tax bracket. That's the percentage of that $34,000 based on your tax bracket. For married folks over here, your provisional income, the first $32,000, zero taxable benefits. From $32,000 to $44,000, up to 50%. And anything over $44,000, up to 85%. Most folks I work with typically are in these bottom two areas. Single folks, anything over $34,000, up to 85% of your taxable benefits. For married folks, up to $44,000, or $44,000 or more, is 85%. So make a note. If you're married, you want to be $44,000 or more. That's when you got to start looking at some tax options to minimize. And for single folks, $34,000. These tables have been the same since 1985. What would happen if a married couple required $40,000 to maintain their standard of living and one of them dies? Still needing the $40,000 to maintain the surviving spouse's lifestyles, what changes would have to take place with their taxes? Something to think about. So how do we reduce or eliminate tax on Social Security income? This is a very complicated discussion, but kind of on a high level. You want to postpone receiving your benefits as long as possible, either by waiting to file or by suspending your claim for later years in which other incomes are lower. Number two, you can reduce other sources of income calculated in provisional income. That includes wages, distributions from 401ks and IRAs, interest and dividend income, including interest on tax-free munis, capital gains, pension payments, taxable portions of inheritance, and other sources of taxable income. A big thing, too, in the tax code, without getting too detailed in this session, there's some wonderful advantages by doing some charitable contributions. Charitable can be to a foundation, a church, a charity, and that sort of thing. So let's talk about the next four topics: spousal benefits, file and restrict strategies, do it over or reset strategies, and start, stop, and restart strategies. So some important benefits to know about spousal benefits. In order to claim a spousal benefit, you must be at least 62 years old or have a qualifying child in your care, been married at least 1 year. And what's a qualifying child? That means a child under the age of 16 who also receives SSI or Social Security benefits. If you elect to receive a spousal benefit before you reach your retirement age, your spousal benefits will be permanently reduced unless you have a qualifying dependent child, in which case the spousal benefit is not reduced. So if you claim a spousal benefit before you reach your retirement age, You will not be able to switch to your own retirement benefit at a later date. So a little complicated, but effectively what this is saying is if you have a child under the age of 16, that may impact your Social Security benefits unless that child is disabled or the other person is already receiving Social Security. But there was an act passed in 2015 called the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2015. The bill was passed into law on 10/29 of 2015. In it, there were some significant changes to Social Security benefits. Most notably, the elimination was the commonly used maximization strategy of file and suspend. File and suspend was last in use on April 30th of 2016. Also, file and restrict was last used in January 2nd of 2024 in the future, except for survivor benefits. No expiration is currently available. A detailed list of the changes can be talked about in the appendix on the workbooks, or I can send it to you if you have your workbook. One of the questions in the audience came up: how does that apply to a spouse being on Social Security and the other being fully employed? Effectively, the great question. If one spouse is on Social Security and the other one is fully employed, effectively the Social Security Administration, for most cases, uses what they call separate silos. They look at the individual worker, whether they're married or not. And the reason for that is if you're working, typically that means you want to defer Social Security longer because you're going to probably get paid more. If you are still working, you typically don't want to trigger Social Security because you're effectively possibly decreasing the amount of wages you're earning. So great question. General rule of thumb is if you are working, try to defer Social Security as long as possible because you may have some very high earning years, which would increase your Social Security for paying for later. So let's talk about divorce. Unfortunately, that does happen more often than we care to admit. So if you're divorced, you may be entitled to spousal Social Security benefits if you're 62 years old, you are married for at least 10 continuous years. Number 3, you're unmarried. Your ex-spouse, however, is entitled. Your ex-spouse could be entitled if they are independently entitled without your ex-spouse being entitled if the ex-spouse is 62 years or older, your divorce has been filed for at least 2 years, and your own worker benefits would be less than 50% of your ex-spouse's primary insurance amount. That's the most important statement there. Your ex-spouse could be entitled if your own worker benefits will be less than half of your ex-spouse's primary insurance amount. It's a little complicated, but be aware that divorce does create some interesting scenarios, but a caveat is it's got to be age restricted, meaning 62 years old or more, married at least 10 continuous years, or you're currently unmarried. So Bipartisan Act of 2015 was passed, and that law basically was passed in October 29th of 2015. In general, the impact of divorcees is similar to that of married couples. If a divorcee is independently entitled, then voluntary suspension rules do not apply. Access to restricted applications stops for those born on or after January 2nd of 1954. Effectively, what Social Security was trying to do with that law in 2015 was restrict, again, trying to limit these huge safety nets so that Social Security can try to remain solvent for as long as possible. There was an estimate right before that law was passed, about a year before that, in 2014, that estimated about a third of divorcees, male or female, were trying to impact the system adversely. There's some other words to use for that, but so the law was passed effectively, again, as I said at the outset, to try to minimize abuse in the system and maximize benefits for those who are playing by the rules. Survivor benefits. This is asked a lot. If you are a widow or a widower, you're eligible to collect either your own benefits or 100% of your deceased spouse benefits, whichever is greater. Very important statement. If you're a widow or widower, Social Security basically says we're going to pay you the benefit of the greater earning spouse. But You got to be at least 60 years old, and you must have been married at least 9 months. And number 3, you must remain unmarried until at least the age of 60. So all they're basically saying is, if you lose a spouse, social policy says, we don't want to penalize you. We're going to give the higher earning spouse the benefit of the highest Social Security payment for you, the survivor. So maximizing lifetime of survivor benefits is critical. What does that mean? This is an amazing statistic. In 2010, there was 53,364 people in the United States at least 100 years old. 17% were men, 82% were women. Statistically, men outlive women by about 5 to 10 years. In Florida, it's about 7.5 years. So life expectancy for males is about 83 years old. For females, it's about 85. And this is amazing. The chance of one spouse living to at least age 97 is 25%. Interesting caveat. This first time in American history, the average life expectancy in the nation actually dropped by a full year because of COVID. So effectively what that means is, because of the pandemic, life expectancy is actually, for the first time in American history, actually dropped a full year. So another question came in here. How do I get disability benefits and Social Security for a person which hasn't reached the disability points age of 59 and a half? Great question. I have a client actually in South Georgia, married couple. They have a son they adopted who's 16 now, just turned 16, and has some learning disabilities. And they initially were turned down. So the best answer to your slide, or the question there on the slide, is simply, a lot depends on the caseworker. So the way you get disability benefits and Social Security for a person who has not reached the disability points of 59 and a half is to talk to the caseworker. Depends on the caseworker, number one. Number two, there is a provision in not just Social Security law, but in the tax code as well. It's called the hardship provision. So without getting too technical, the hardship provision simply says, if it would be an undue hardship on you and or the family, they can make exceptions. So it's not a great answer, but it kind of depends. The good news is, candidly, here in the state of Florida, the caseworkers tend to be pretty forgiving. They understand there's a lot of retirees down here, and it's a big state. So the other neat thing about it is, if you get a decision you don't like, you also have the right of appeal. I have a number of families over the years who don't like the decision. They appeal, and you don't have to always hire a lawyer. There are some avenues for that. So make a note if you have a specific circumstance and what those specifics are. Let me know that, and we'll find out the specific answer for you. So, how long will you live? People ask me this all the time. Well, if you reach age 92, you got a 50% chance of living at least that longer. If you're 97 years old, I've got about 1 in 4 chance. And again, age 100, it's about 1 in 10. So, it's a little bit of roll of dice. I have a client over in Pensacola area who have to take Social Security as soon as he hit age 62 because he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer with about a 7 to 8% chance of living more than 3 years. Now, this was 8 years ago. So he just turned 71, still living, and it's in remission. So he said, well, maybe I should have waited, but nobody has a crystal ball. I remind people we don't get a vote on our genetic code. So I think a good thing to think about in all this discussion is look at your mother and father and their mother and father. Most physicians and doctors will tell you, based on the physician's history of your parents and what the physician's records show, the statistical life expectancy typically is based on your parents and your grandparents, those two. Now, somebody says, well, I had a great grandfather who lived to be 104. Usually the DNA often doesn't go back that far, but the takeaway here is for everyone on the slide, you got 1 out of 10 chance of living to be at least 100 years old. So I don't see anybody taking bids there yet. So this is a little technical, but let's go to case study. It's called a File and Restrict Spousal Benefit Case Study. We got Joe and Cindy. Joe, if he takes out Social Security benefits at age 62, $1,675. If he wages to age 66, is $2,416. And if he wages to age 70, $34. Now let's look at Cindy. She takes it out at 62, $681. She waits to age 66 is $982, or she waits to age 70 is $1396. What's the spousal benefit? $837 for age 62. It's $1,208 at age 66. And then, of course, you can see over here at age 70. So the deemed spousal benefit, both filed at age 66, the cumulative combined benefit at age 90 would be $1,392,459. So real mathematically, to keep this simple, you can see the difference here between age 62 and 66 for Joe is $800 a month. And 66 to 70 is $1,200 a month. So $1,200 a month times 100 months, that's $120,000. 120 months is really all about 8.5, 9 years. So it's a little kind of technical here, but the takeaway is you can see the difference, a magnitude of just 4-year difference, 62 to 66, and then 66 to age 70. So Cindy files for her benefit at age 66 over here. Joe files a restricted application for half of her benefit at 66. Joe then files a full benefit at age 60. Cindy automatically gets the spousal excess now that Joe's elected. So what? $1,545,000. So effectively, the takeaway is by Joe filing a restricted application, the married couple has a $152,000 advantage in their favor. This gets real technical, and I could probably put you to sleep getting too detailed. The takeaway here again is if the spouse files a restricted application and decides to wait to age 70, you have a $152,000 advantage over time, assuming you live to be at least 90 years old. It's very powerful. There's another option for you. It's called a do-over or reset strategy. It's only available once in a lifetime. It must be requested within 1 year of the initial claim for benefits. That's it. You got a 1-year option. And you must pay back all the benefits received for both the individual and spouse, if applicable. It's called a Form 521 or request for withdrawal. In other words, you might come away from this webinar and say, Mr. Morgan's given me some great ideas. I'm going to eat a bunch of kale and become a vegetarian. I'm going to live forever. Just teasing. But effectively, this is saying, that's a big difference. 8% per year in my favor. I'm going to go back and stop the clock and start over later. You've got 1 year to do that if you've started taking out Social Security. So it's called a voluntary suspension. And how does that work? You must reach full retirement age or later to suspend benefits. You can restart them at any time. You can suspend the benefits by 8% a year to age 70. If the benefits are not restarted until age 70, monthly payments will be 32% higher than the FRA for life. And there's no additional growth beyond age 70. Somebody asked me in the pop-up room here, any veggies I'd recommend. I always taught, the basics. Carrots make you see better, and peas make you healthy, and spinach makes you strong. But most vegetables are pretty good for you. So the takeaway right here is on voluntary suspension, you must start, stop, and restart the strategy. You can do so at any time, but you must, most importantly, be at least full retirement age. Now, here back to the question I was asked a minute ago. What happens if I outlive my money? There is a projection that up to half, almost 44% of baby boomers and Gen Xers could lack enough money for income. So we ask some simple questions. What's your current income needs? How do you anticipate your retirement your income needs will be? And how can I close the gap? A couple takeaways. People assume once they retire, well, I'm retired now, I don't need that much money to live on. There's a general rule of thumb for those listening. Take your highest earning year, 3 years. It might have been in your 40s or 50s. It could have been right when you retired at 60 or so, late 60s. Take the top 3 earning years, average. So 70,000, 75,000, and 80. So your 75,000 is your average. Statistically, most folks need at least 80% of that to live on in retirement. So 80% of 75,000 is around $58,000 a year. People say, well, how do you, that's just a statistical average. But here's the wild card, and you may know what that is. The wild card is healthcare. It only takes one disabling event. My mother had Alzheimer's. My father has a host of things happen before they both passed. But so the general rule of thumb is take your current income level if you're in your 60s and typically shave off about 20%. And that's what you'll need in typically retirement because Social Security will make up a lot of that. So how do you close the gap? It's asked a lot of times. i.e., what other source of incomes do I have? Well, let's look at some options. You have Roth IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, and what's called retirement accounts. What are the good news? If you are in one of these plans or don't have one, I implore anybody working to try to maximize these as much as possible. Why? First off, many times the employer will match, oftentimes up to 6%. Where else can you go and get 6% free money? 6% of that, your earnings. Secondarily, you have you maintain control over your account. And number 3, it's tax deductible when you make a contribution. Make a note also, if you are working and have one of these plans, you have what they call the ERISA law, or Incidence of Ownership. Back to 1974, the ERISA law was called the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. And what that act basically said was, when you have a retirement plan, you as an employee, it's like owning a house. You have equity in the house. You have equity in your retirement plan. This is real important. Make sure you go to your HR department or your employer and ask them, can you please tell me under the ERISA law what my equity or my rights are? Incidence of ownership, they probably don't know what you're talking about, but that's important to ask that question because a lot of folks don't realize there are some options in the private sector that often will do better or outperform. Now, I'm not saying take them all out. I'm not saying go fully self-directed, but I maintain a portion, depends on your circumstance, a portion of your retirement funds often are better in the private sector while still maintaining your retirement fund. Now, what's the downside? Well, you got market risk. We can talk about that one-on-one. There's ways to mitigate that. Number 2, fully taxable distribution. What does that mean? When you put money aside in a 401k or a qualified plan, you will have to pay tax when you take the money out. But remember, when you take money out when you're retired, you're typically in a lower tax bracket. And you're also going to take the risk of investment decisions and income distribution. So a lot of moving parts here. This is a very personal thing. But know that if you have a 401k, IRA, or any sort of qualified plan, that is a source of retirement income for you. Some folks have defined pension plans. They're not as frequent as you think, but they're fully funded by the employer, not the employee. They're fairly simple. They're pretty much a known amount. My father, when he retired from publishing, got a guaranteed pension for as long as he lived. If my mother outlived him, there was also a survivor benefit. The downside is they typically only one plan, meaning there's either a 401k or defined benefit plan. Most companies don't offer both. You don't get a vote. It's up to the company as to how they invest that money. You don't have an inflation hedge. It's a locked in dollar amount and it's set for 10, 20, 30, however many years you're going to live. And again, it is fully taxable. Defined benefit pension plans are actually about less than 10% of the retirement funds right now. And candidly, here in Florida, they're not as big because there's not a lot of major employers here. But if you do have a defined benefit pension plan, two takeaways. Number one, find out if, in fact, it is for life. You'd be amazed. Some are set for a period of time of 10 period. It's called a 10-year certain or 20-year certain, meaning I get it for 10 or 20 years and it's over. And the most important question, you'd be amazed how many people never ask this question. Go to your employer and ask them, do I have a survivor benefit? Why? Typically, if you have a survivor benefit, the payment will be a little bit lower because they're paying it over 2 lifetimes. Other people say, well, my spouse is gone and or she doesn't need the money, or I'm single or widowed or divorced, then the amount could be higher. So please make a takeaway here. Look into the beneficiary and the survivor benefits on any defined benefit plan as well as 401k. Let's talk about investments for a moment. Dividends and interest from stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and CDs. The neat part is you maintain control over the account. You have a potential for tax advantage forms of income, meaning long-term capital gains, and taxes typically are paid only on the earnings. The downside, of course, you got to pay taxes. You do have the loss of potential loss of principal due to market risk. You have the risk of reinvestment risk. And you also, of course, have principal protection, growth, and income are not always guaranteed because, again, you're taking the risk of making investment decisions and income distributions. So 2 takeaways here. Without getting too detailed, there are some wonderful things now available in the market that a lot of advisory teams are starting to catch up. I'm proud to say we're pretty leading edge on this. It's called a stop loss. A stop loss, think of it as a safety net. Even in the investment world, there are some ways to mitigate or offset risk. Now, people say, David, I want no risk. I remind you, don't get out of bed. Getting out of bed in the morning is a risk. You're going to fall and break your rear end. But there's some wonderful ways to mitigate risk. And effectively what a stop loss says, to use a metaphor, is if all my funds are on the Titanic, as an example, and that Titanic gets near the glacier, as soon as it starts getting near the glacier, I'm going to drop my life rafts and do something safe and secure till more turbulence goes away and there's more calm going on. So that's the first takeaway. The second takeaway is you should remember that there are some wonderful tax-free instruments now that were not available even 10 or 20 years ago to the diversity and availability they are currently. So I have the discussion with some folks in the insurance world. I'm not anti-insurance, but what's happened candidly in the investment and securities world is the major financial institutions and fund companies have realized people are looking for safety and security. So how do we undergird that? Make a note again. That's something we can talk about one-on-one. Question came in here talking about this. If I have a 401k, should I go privately or just leave it with the employer? I got to be careful. My son worked for a major telecommunications company. When he worked for them, they were pretty good. But candidly, folks, the last 8 to 10 years have been wonderful. When the ocean rises, all boats rise. Everybody's been on a rock and roll period. The trouble, generally speaking, is once you leave an employer, you're not an orphan account, but you sort of are. Most studies will show that the private sector or private market will outperform a company one. Why? Because if they're in telecommunications or retail, that's their core business. And typically the funds are in just one sector. In the private sector, you want to be diversified. I use a corny metaphor. Think of an egg carton. If you're in the telecommunications world or retail, you tend to have all your holdings in those sectors. But an egg carton has 12 eggs. You want to look at manufacturing. You want to look at international, national. So yes, to answer the question, we help folks come up with some private sector options. And I often remind folks, you might want to keep a percentage of your holdings in the private, in the public, in the company you left. My grandmother, Kenley, was a big believer in J.C. Penney. My grandfather was one of the first managers of J.C. Penney way back in the 30s and 40s while she taught on the Indian reservation. So, of course, when he passed away, all of her retirement was tied to one stock. Of course, I was a young kid. What was I going to tell my grandmother, right? But it's a classic case in point where loyalty is wonderful. I don't devalue or diminish loyalty to, in that case, J.C. Penney. But to use a metaphor, you don't want all your eggs in one basket. You don't want all just one egg carton, one egg in the egg carton represented. You want to diversify across a globally diversified class of funds. So again, make a note. That's the kind of thing we can kind of talk about one-on-one. Let's talk about the big word annuities. What's an annuity? Well, there's all sorts of good, bad, and ugly about these. There's basically four forms of annuities: variable, indexed, fixed, and immediate. First of all, let's define annuity. Social Security is an annuity. Annuity is a promise to pay a stated sum of money for a certain amount of time. It could be $1,000 for 10 years, then it's over. It could be 20 years, and then it goes to my spouse or my kids, i.e. there's a survivor benefit. What are the good points about it? Typically, you maintain control over the account. Number two, you do get tax deferral on the earnings, and there are no mandatory distributions unless it's an IRA. And you do have potential for guaranteed principal growth and income. There are two huge caveats. One the slide doesn't talk about, one does. First off, many of them have a minimum commitment of a minimum of 5 years. Some of them have 10 years. In the state of Florida, most annuities are either 5 or 10 years now, but I see folks over the years that have 12, 15, sometimes 17-year commitments. That's way too long for somebody 70 years old, in my personal opinion and professional opinion. There's another con the slide doesn't talk about, but I will. And there's a word up here you see, the variable. Make a note, if you have a variable annuity, I'm very impassioned about this. There are a lot of under-the-hood fees that are in the prospectus, but they're disclosed, but they're not often easily read. And make a note, if you have a variable annuity, I have a number of different private studies that show variable annuity cost, fees, and expenses. The under-the-hood fees buried in the prospectus, page 28 or second paragraph on page 32, can often be 2 to 4%, i.e., if the variable annuity is costing you 2 to 4%, it's a drag on return. So I'm not anti-annuity, but you got to read the fine print. The devil's in the details. So for most people, given a choice of the 4 different types of annuities, typically you want to, in my view, do it immediate for if you need money immediately, indexed or fixed, simply meaning there's ways to get a steady income stream. And these are very complicated. I do have a certification in annuities. It was like taking a master's degree in finance and mathematics, but it's like a snowflake, my friends. There are no two, they're identical. But what I can do, and here's where the legal training is wonderful, is help you go through this stuff. I mean, it's kind of like the Magna Carta. Most people just don't want to sit and try to read and understand them. So that's what annuities are. Permanent life insurance. There's basically 3 forms of permanent life insurance: whole life, index universal life, and term life. Whole life basically is kind of like, I'm going to pay the insurance company a premium. After a certain number of months or years, I have enough equity in the policy where the dividends will pay the future premiums, like owning a house. So I get equity in the policy. Index universal life is the second option, which means I'm going to get a return on what the insurance company invests in. So some years I might get a 7% growth in the contract, or I might get 5 or 6 or sometimes double digit. Term life basically is like rental, like renting a house or renting an apartment. I pay a smaller premium, but it's only good for that year or that period of time. If I don't pay the premium anymore, I'll lose the benefit. There's also a takeaway on this slide. I got to say it nicely. In the state of Florida, whole life and universal life insurance, typically after about age 75, underwriting can be very, very difficult. There's a lot of retirees here. Life insurance is regulated by the state, not the federal government. And the states have a pool of risk because a lot of retirees down here. Typically, life insurance gets very, very expensive once you hit in your mid to late 70s. The advantage, of course, of life insurance, you control your account, you get income tax-free loans and withdrawals, no penalties for early access, no RMDs, and you typically are leaving a leveraged death benefit. Life insurance still is one of the few payouts upon death that are still zero tax. The two caveats, as I said, number one is underwriting. I can't sugarcoat it. It's a challenge here in the state of Florida. And number two, it does take time to get up and running. Right now, the average, especially with COVID, the average underwriting time is 2 to 3 months. And that's assuming people answer the phones and are working. That's another discussion. So please hear me out. I'm not anti-insurance. But life insurance, there's a lot of moving parts with it. So make a simple answer when people say, David, do I need life insurance? It's basically designed to replace lost income. Most retirees, not all, most retirees, their kids or grandkids are emancipated or hopefully on the way to becoming emancipated. So they often look at life insurance as just a part of the plan, not the primary plan. Let's see here. So where do we go from here? I heard a great line. Somebody said, David, what's old? I said, old is always 10 years older than you are. So you never really get old. But I will tell you this, I've learned this over the years. People say, well, I'm in my 60s. It's just too late. Folks, I promise you, it's never too late. A little takeaway I'll throw out here. It's not on the slide. But as an example, if you go to the bank tomorrow and open a Roth IRA for $5 or $10, you actually have a 5-year window of time to contribute more to that Roth IRA. And so when you trigger the withdrawal, it starts from when the day you opened it. So without getting too detailed, there's those little takeaways where we think having a primary advisory team in your behalf actually can help you. So you can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn. We have Facebook and Twitter. I don't do a whole lot of that myself. But I thank you for attending. I'd like you folks to take a minute or two. If you hear something you think was of value, we'd love to get your input here to get your course content. Tell us what you liked about the course. And as a final footnote, we send a magazine out about once every 6 weeks to our clients. It's nothing about finance or taxes or legal stuff. It's a lifestyle magazine called American Lifestyle. Just got these in a couple hours ago for this month. We got nice recipe books in here. We have a bunch of modules about the courses we offer. But one of the neatest parts of this study is on the back page. And I've asked this all the time. David, I'm going to do this myself. Why do I think an advisory team would be helpful? Whether it's us or whoever. And basically, this was a study done by Cerulli. Cerulli is one of the research groups in our industry. And they found that in 2021, the value of working with an advisor and advisory team can make up to a difference of 4.83% advantage in your favor. Why? Because we are human beings. We're subject to emotion. We don't often act out of prudence. So the value of an advisor, they call the ABCs, active, behavioral, customization. T stands for taxation issues and that sort of thing. P stands for product alignment. So make a note. If you're interested in getting a second opinion, I like to frame it as getting a second look at your x-rays. Most people somewhere in their portfolio, whether it's their tax situation, their legal documents, their financial holdings, may have something in their holdings that warrants a second opinion. So if you'd like that second opinion, we'd love to set up a brief complimentary 15-minute phone call strategy with you. You can call to set a strategy. And Carol, I'm going to let you kind of wrap up and close if you'd like to add anything or throw any 2 cents in.
No, thanks. I just wanted to thank everybody tonight for logging into our webinar. We had some really great questions. It was a really good interactive session tonight. So thanks for all your interest and engaging. And David, great job. A lot of good information and some good notes to take away for everybody.
Great. And Carol, why don't you maybe just share the website or maybe your email address for those who have an interest?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and put the offer out one more time here. So if you could just click on the pop-up here, you can click that tab, click to schedule now, the green tab, and that will take you to David's calendar where you can sign up for a 15-minute phone strategy call with David. And once you do that, I'll be able to give you a call and confirm your time. And I've gone ahead and pushed that out. And then I'll push out one more time the course evaluation.
Okay.
So if you could complete our course evaluation, that gives us some good feedback, some good constructive criticism in a good way for us to improve on our presentations moving forward. Thank you.
Well, great. Thanks so much. You've been a great audience. I hope you've got some value out of this. So thanks very much, folks.
And thank you, David.
Okay. Bye-bye now.